Hi, eighth graders. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over the two diagrams that should have already been completed and placed in your notebook. These are going to act as your notes for the first section of your Earth unit, okay? So the first diagram that you did was the compositional layers of the Earth diagram, and that's the one that looks like this, okay? I apologize that I have to do it this way because I did not bring home my ladybug for me to show you this properly. Okay, so here's the biggest things that you need to make sure that we're done on your assignment. Okay, first thing is you've got to have labeled all of the continental crusts, and those are crusts that are basically that you can see above the water that are made of very specific type of materials, and we'll go over that here in a minute. So you've got continental crust here that's green, continental crust here that is green, and then you have some over here that is green as well. Keep in mind that the Earth is round, so obviously we also have continental crust that's down here that's really the entire bottom, and up here, which is really the entire top. Everything else is oceanic crust. Now, yes, it makes sense that oceanic crust is found underneath the ocean and continental crust is found on the continent. Well, here are the biggest things about the two different types of crust that you should know, okay? And you need to add these into your notes if you haven't already done that, okay? So we're going to start with the continental crust. So I would draw an arrow somewhere where you have some empty space, like I have some right here. Draw an arrow coming out of your continental crust, and you're going to add these particular facts right here, okay? So one of the things you need to know is that continental crust can range in thickness. In fact, continental crust is thicker. It can be between 5 to 30 kilometers thick. The thicker parts are where your mountains are, okay? It is considered less dense. Less dense meaning it will be more likely to float higher than something that is more dense. And we'll talk about more dense here in a minute. Most of continental crust is made of granite or some form of granite. And obviously the last note on here is that you will find them along the continents. So continental crust found on continents. Makes sense. Okay. So then you're going to add in those notes for oceanic crust. Okay, notice that I have pointed an arrow from the oceanic crust to this blank space here and added these notes. Oceanic crust is thinner, okay? In fact, they're usually typically 5 kilometers thick, maybe more, maybe less. They are more dense, hence that's why they're sunk underneath the oceans, and they actually go way underneath, far below the what we call the sea level, below sea level. Most of oceanic crust you will find basalts. Okay, it's a type of rock, and again, found under the oceans. Okay, so just because oceanic crust and continental crust is just found in continents versus ocean isn't just that. There's other properties that go along with that. Okay, speaking of properties, this is called the compositional layers unit because we're going to talk about the different other layers. Okay, so we've just talked about how the crust is made of basalt and granite. So let's talk about the next layer underneath, which is the mantle. Okay, notice here I've added in some other notes about the crust. Okay, it contains something called silicates. Okay, S-I-L-I-C-A-T-E. You need to add that to this part of your diagram. It is considered the thinnest layer of all of these compositional layers, and it's solid. In fact, it is one of the two solid layers that are found on our compositional layers diagram. And I'll talk about the other layer that is solid as well. Now let's talk about the mantle. Okay, let me turn this. So the mantle is made of two main elements called magnesium and iron. The mantle is the thickest layer. It has a putty-like consistency, or I always call like pudding-like. So chocolate pudding, vanilla pudding, it's kind of that consistency. It's not really a solid. It's not really a liquid. It's something in between. And yes, this is where your first remnants of magma is found. So when you see magma, that means it's rock that's coming from the mantle. Underneath the mantle, so first, before I flip over, make sure you put these notes in. But underneath the mantle, we will then have the core, okay? The core is made of iron and nickel. Later on, you're going to find out that there's an inner core and an outer core, okay? The inner core is the other solid layer, but for right now, all we're going to put down is that the inner core, or I'm sorry, that the core is made of iron and nickel. Okay, if you remember, Fe stands for iron, Ni stands for nickel. That was from our chemistry unit last year that we had a very short unit of because of COVID. All right. So that's it for your diagram of your compositional layers. So make sure that is completed and filled in properly. And then next we're going to move on to your physical layers diagram in the next video. Go over your Earth's physical layers diagram. So this is the diagram that you started out with, which was a blank black and white copy in your notebook. And you should have colored all of the parts in, and then it should look like something like this, wherein you've got the water, which represents the ocean, continental crust. Underneath the ocean would be oceanic crust. And again, here you'll have oceanic crust. Yes, you will find some oceanic crust underneath continental crust. Okay. And then you have the upper mantle, you have the middle mantle. The upper mantle and the crust make up something called the lithosphere. The middle mantle and the upper mantle make up something called the asthenosphere. And then you have the lower mantle and the lower part, or the lower mantle and the middle mantle make up the mesosphere. Then you have the outer core and then the inner core. So these are what we call the physical layers of the diagram. We're going to focus on these right here, the lithosphere, asthenosphere, mesosphere, outer core, inner core. The next part is in your second page of your notebook, or next page of your notebook. You had to actually take these facts, these right here, and actually put them in the appropriate categories under lithosphere, asthenosphere, mesosphere, outer core, and inner core. So what I'm going to do right now is to go over the answers to these to make sure they are in the proper sections of your notebook, okay? So with that being said, let's start with the first fact, the outermost layer, okay? This particular one would be under the lithosphere. Okay, next one, only liquid layer due to high temperature. So that one is actually the outer core. It is the only liquid layer. And pressure. You can add that part about pressure here. Okay, it is the only liquid layer of all the layers of our planet Earth. Largest amount of heat and pressure. Okay, that's this one right here, the inner core. Let me actually put that one in here. Any of these are incorrect, then you need to fix these in your notebook before I get an opportunity to check them. Next one contains the crust and outermost layer of the mantle. That's this one right here. In other words, it contains the crust and the upper part of the mantle. Okay, this one is your putty-like layer. So I kind of think of it as like Jello, or more like actual pudding. Okay, like Hershey's pudding or chocolate pudding. Next one, solid layer made of mostly iron and nickel. That's this one right here, the inner core. Okay, rock flows in this layer like putty. Well, kind of makes sense. The putty-like layer has flows like putty. This is where your lava and magma is. And we're going to talk about that. Lava and magma, they're actually the same thing. The only difference between the two is that lava is found on the Earth's surface because it's more oxygenated, and magma is found underneath the Earth's surface because it has less oxygen. It's the only difference between the two. Okay. Lower layer of the mantle, and that's the mesosphere. So let's add that fact in.
Okay. And we'll unhighlight that. And finally, the last part, most dense and rigid layer of the mantle. And that one is this one. That means it's most dense is that it actually has the most amount of material to it. That way, that's why it's more toward the center of the Earth because of its density. Those that are less dense, like the lithosphere, end up on the outermost layer. And obviously, the inner core is the most dense layer out of all of them. Hence, that's why it's in the center. So you need to make sure that these facts are correct in your notebook. Okay, so that might mean erasing and rewriting these. You can always go back and replay and replay and rewind this video so that you can go back and fix any of them that you might have missed. All right. With that being said, you are done and corrected these particular models. Eventually, you are going to have a quiz on these two type of models of the Earth. So definitely keep these close and obviously make sure that these are correct. All right. Any questions, messages, send me a message through Schoology.